Hmm. 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 It takes some time. Hmm. Okay, never experienced that long before, but to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Benjamin Schmitt, who is an expert in energy security, and he is also a fellow at CEPA, Central for European Policy Analysis, and he also worked at the Energy Bureau of the US State Department. And we will talk today on Russian sabotage. How does Russian sabotage impact the European security, if there is such thing as Russian sabotage? And yes, and how does it work? What is the problem? Do Russians openly attack our infrastructure? And how does it work? And what are their targets, etc., etc., etc. So now I'm trying to understand still if we are online. Yes, I think we are online pretty much. So yes, it was not in vain what I used to say now. Benjamin, welcome to our show. And if you see that my eyes are running around like, and I look left and right, just I'm reading the chat in our broadcasting. So don't be surprised. Okay, how does Sergey act so weirdly? It is just because I want to be sure that all of your let me say, of all of your news, all of your questions, all of your comments are being recorded, and that you can really ask questions to Benjamin in this show. So after this long introduction, welcome, Dr. Benjamin Schmitt.
Great to be here, Sergey. Great to be with the European Resilience Initiative, and hello, audience. It's I don't know, live from Berlin. It's Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is not live from Berlin, I need to say, because I'm now in Lviv in Ukraine,
Okay.
and you are in the US, I guess,
I'm
on
in
the East
Philadelphia.
Coast
That's
somewhere.
Right. Yep, I'm in Philadelphia.
You're in Philadelphia. So we have like
yeah.
Yeah, we have a real transatlantic live broadcasting now between Lviv and Philadelphia. Great to hear you. Great to have you here, Benjamin. And once again, Benjamin is an expert in security of energy infrastructure, and he is one of the persons who has warned about Russian sabotage against European power networks and energy networks and communication networks and transport networks and every single network which you can imagine, where Russians have a significant interest of making our life not easy. So, wow, my first question, is this shit real? Like many people say, oh no, Sergey, you are paranoid, Benjamin is paranoid, everyone is paranoid, except of Gazprom managers who say us keep buying our gas.
Well, it's real. I don't know who's saying we're being paranoid. These are events that have happened in real life for the past several years, 2 years especially since Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine began. But even especially and even in the past 6 months, we have seen on a weekly, if not daily basis, instances of sabotage, many of which have been targeting energy, critical infrastructure, things like pipelines, electricity grids, rail networks, telecommunications cables, cell towers, the works. All of these have been targeted over the past several months. And of course, this has been going back to even before Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine. So I don't know anyone that has told me that I'm being paranoid about this, because these are events that are happening in reality, right? These are demonstrably happening and covered in the media. And for many of the cases, we have seen either Russian actors or Russian hired proxies. So the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, has hired basically low-level criminals and crooks and people like this that are, in many cases, non-Russian nationals, including those of Belarusian descent, Ukrainian descent, Polish descent, etc., to go and do everything from spray anti-Ukraine and anti-NATO propaganda on walls and try to whip up disinformation, all the way through arson attacks, cable cuts, and things like this. And so we've seen attribution take place in countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, France, and the United Kingdom. And we've seen this basically go on where military leaders, where political leaders, where intelligence leaders on both sides of the transatlantic community have been warning publicly to the press and in public speeches. The UK has done this a lot. The United States has done this a lot. Germany has done this a lot, et cetera, that there are definite threats of Russian sabotage and that these are real and these are incidents that are going on. Does that mean that every single incident that impacts critical and energy infrastructure and things like this necessarily has Russian culpability? No, I would expect not every single one, but a large majority have, and we know this because they are attributable already, right? So this isn't something that we are imagining. And I'll just take a sip from my mug here that I've got and just remind the audience of kind of what we have to remember in general that goes all the way back to the 1940s and 1950s. The main element of any United States policy toward the Soviet Union must be that of a long-term, patient but firm and vigilant commitment to containment of Russian expansive tendencies. That's George Kennan. So smart man and something we think about.
Yeah, Benjamin, thank you. Thank you so much for this introduction and this great explanation as the beginning. But before we go further, to be sure that we are not speaking in vain, please, those who listen to us, can you confirm that sound is okay? Because I have here a warning. Because I'm in Ukraine, which normally has very good internet, but I'm afraid that it can be that currently internet is not perfect. Can you confirm that you can hear us loud and clear? Can you confirm that the connection is good? Because if it is not, we can switch to another source of internet. Please drop a line in the commentary section if the connection is good. Yeah, because I constantly get warnings that the connection is not good. Okay, Nathalie Fogel says sound is good. Are you hearing us on YouTube or on Twitter, Nathalie? It's nice to see. But if anyone is on YouTube and the sound is bad, please drop a line. Sergej, sound is bad. Okay, connection is good. Thank you. Connection is good. I'm happy.
Hello, everybody. Good. Connection is good.
Yeah, connection is good. Good. So, Benjamin, you have mentioned arsonist attacks, and that is exactly what I wanted to ask you a bit later. But as soon as you have mentioned it, the OCCRP, this international network of investigating journalists, they have okay, connection is if sound is fine, YouTube. Okay, sound is fine. Good. Then if sound is fine, it's fine. Like OCCRP said that they have found a network of Russian agents trying to hire people in Estonia via Telegram channels with very simple questions like, do you want to earn money? And if they said yes, then the Russian Telegram channels, which is practically a bot, asked them, have you had a military experience? If yes, are you ready to, what kind of tasks are you ready to fulfill? Are you ready to kill people? Are you ready to set on fire military equipment? Are you ready to set any equipment on fire? Are you ready to spread graffiti, etc.? And they have found out that the Russians are actively hiring civilians in Estonia who feel somehow connected to the Russian cause and are ready to kill people and destroy things, preferably military equipment, preferably soldiers. Also, CRP is a respectful media network. I trust them completely that the Russians do it. If they say they have found this network, I believe them every word. But I wonder, do the Russians do this all over Europe? I guess yes. But what do your information sources say you?
Well, Sergey, I haven't read the OCCRP report, but they are a tremendous organization, and as you said, I really respect them. I look forward to reading that basically as soon as we get off this this call. I definitely am interested in hearing more about that that evidence in Estonia. We have seen media reports of this sort of same dynamic where Telegram channels in particular are used to recruit and hire disaffected citizens and low-level criminals and goons and crooks and things like this in the way that you're talking about, and it's done by just basically starting with you, as you said, do you want to earn some money? And these are not high price operations. These are things that they spend maybe a few hundred euros, a few thousand euros, depending on the task. And we've seen this where it's kind of a gateway drug sort of thing, as I would describe it, where a Polish national, there's been media reports of this, who's been arrested in Poland on these exact grounds, basically said he was started to be recruited to do very small scale things like, as I said, spray painting anti-NATO or anti-Ukraine propaganda on a wall and this sort of thing, and was basically asked again, okay, the next thing, can you do this and that and that, and it was going all the way to, can you surveil and then possibly, cut cables or have sabotage of some type on, I believe it was rail infrastructure that was going to supply. Be used to supply Ukraine military equipment from Poland. And what he told the press was that he felt suddenly uncomfortable with this because of the risk of harming people, and so didn't carry it out, but at the same time was arrested by Polish authorities, and rightfully so, for going along with this. But I think the long story short is that this scenario that you've described is absolutely taking place, and it's absolutely taking place to try to destabilize a Western resolve to support Ukraine and trying to destabilize Western political dynamics, as always. And it's kind of a different form of the same thing that we've seen for years from the Putin regime, which is to have disinformation, to have hybrid threats, and to have all of these sort of multispectral threat vectors put together to try to destabilize our support for pushing back on Russian malign activities. And so, Sergey, you probably know the AC/DC song, Dirty Deeds and They're Done Dirt Cheap. Well, that's what Putin's doing, right? These are Russian military intelligence hiring folks for a very low amount of money to do in some cases, a low amount of dirty deeds. So they're dirty deeds and they're done dirt cheap. And that's something that we have to remember and something we have to push against.
Absolutely, and there is a question in the chat: are these historic Estonians or Russians settled during the Soviet Union days? And as far as I understand, the Russian intelligence tries, of course, to address those who feel somehow connected to Russia. So they are those from Russian-speaking families, which makes them an easier target to being addressed in Russian language, and trying to convince them to do something for Russia. But let me remind you that there was a case like 5-6 years ago when two Polish citizens who were born as Polish citizens in Polish families they felt somehow identified with the Russian cause. They went to fight to Donbass on the side of Russian army, still years before the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine. And then they came back to Poland. They were somehow hired by Russian intelligence, and they got paid for arsonist attacks on territory of Ukraine. They were paid by a German guy who was an employee at a deputy office of a Germany far-right AfD party. And this German person paid them money so they could go to Ukraine and set afire an ethnic Hungarian culture center in Uzhgorod to simulate a sort of Ukrainian attack on Hungarian cultural institution. And that was what the Russian intelligence wanted to achieve. They wanted to show that like someone in Ukraine wants to destroy Hungarian cultural heritage, etc. And why am I talking you that? To stress answering this question, is Russian intelligence targeting and trying to get support from only Russian ethnic people or other people? Of course, they wanted to like hire everyone who they think is able to do things. Yeah, a question from Natalie Fogel. I think it's not
Wait, Sergey,
towards me.
can I say something on
Yeah,
that,
please.
Sergey?
Please,
But
Benjamin.
just to remind, since we're talking, this is kind of a live radio show sort of format. So to tell the listener about this a little bit more, one of the things that Sergey is pointing out is that this is to create intra-EU tensions, right? Or tensions between Ukraine and EU member states. So certainly, the authoritarian government in Hungary, Orban's government, has really made this position very clear, and the Russians only want to accelerate that anti-Ukrainian sentiment in Hungary through these sort of attacks. But at the same time, we've seen evidence and arrests go out from European member states in which we have seen, as I said, Ukrainian nationals, Belarusian nationals, Poles, Czechs, etc., be hired to do these sort of things. And I think part of that is to show to the world, that Russia can reach out and recruit, disaffected members of democratic societies to fight against those societies in which they live and they benefit. So that's a big part of that. And again, that's really stemming off of all of the various disinformation and multispectral hybrid threats that we've seen throughout the years as well. So again, it's all very, very monolithic in the sense of how Russia weaponizes all of these areas at once. They do it for the same themes and the same sort of goals.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that is actually like the Russians say. I always say that the Russians have several goals in their propaganda. First, they want to make us sure that there is no truth. They don't want to convince us in something, but they want us to believe that there is no such thing as truth. And the second thing is they want us to start to hate each other. They want the Poles to start to hate Ukrainians. They want Ukrainians to start to hate Poles. They want Germans to hate everyone. They want the Americans hate everyone, including their fellow Americans, etc., etc. But before we go like further in this analysis of Russian propaganda, because I think it is another topic which we could address a lot. And the comments from Natalie Fogel I read here. First, please, those who watch our YouTube translation, our YouTube broadcasting, go and find the interview with Natalie Fogel about Russian intelligence networks, how they address our academia and our political actors. Extremely informative interview, and I think we can talk with Natalie Fogel one of next days in this similar live show. But we have here another question from her, and I think that is addressed to Benjamin, because I have not testified before Congress. But she asks, have you recently testified before Congress? Which impact do you expect to have? Benjamin, have you testified before Congress?
I have testified before Congress very, very publicly. So I think everyone that is a follower of mine on Twitter has seen that posted. I testified just 2 weeks ago before the joint U.S. Senate and U.S. House of Representatives Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's a joint committee that focuses on these issues, and it's the part of the U.S. Helsinki Commission. And so we had U.S. senators and U.S. House members brought together and bringing experts in, myself, the chief of Estonian, basically national security advisor to their president, and Michael Weiss, investigative journalist, who I'm sure many of you know, and Sergej, I'm sure that you know. And so the three of us testified at a hearing entitled Russia's Shadow War Against NATO. And so we had this testimony, this hearing, and one of the questions is this a shadow war or just a war? And I say it's just a war, right? At this point, right? You can say it's a shadow war, but we know who's in the shadows in this case. We've already pointed it out on this live show, and you know, I pointed out a number of elements of the work that I'm doing at the University of Pennsylvania's Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. That's where I am based. I'm based in Philadelphia, and I both do research on physics research, but also on European energy security, Russia sanctions, and open source intelligence methods. And I teach a class called Energy Geopolitics and National Security to students at the university who are interested in these topics. And in particular, one of the main areas of focus is basically of my research and my teaching is what I testified on, which is Russian sabotage operations and other sort of means to destabilize and target energy and critical infrastructure across Northern Europe. And that testimony basically highlighted four main case studies of my field research on this. And those are as follows. Number one, I went to Svalbard in the community of Longyearbyen, in the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard, just 400 miles from the North Pole, and basically looked into a sabotage attack that took place way back on January 7th of 2022, in which a Russian fishing trawler, the Melkart 5, was shown on AIS, Automatic Identification System, which is the radio signal that a commercial vessel or a larger vessel will put out when it's on the high seas. Well, it was shown to have basically crisscrossed the Svalsat subsea telecommunications cables, fiber optic network. And after crossing a point directly on that cable over 130 times, that cable was broken. And either there's extremely very interesting fishing going on in an extremely narrow area, or this was an intentional act in which, and that's what I believe we've concluded through our research, that this sort of thing is important to the Russians because it signals that they can do these sort of hard to attribute offshore sabotage operations and do it in a way that they have plausible deniability, right? It's, you know, we can say that we believe that they did this on purpose, but they can also come back and say it was just a fishing vessel, and you know they were putting down a net and it broke the cable and it was a complete accident, or claim that they had nothing to do with it, right? And there's really no way to fully prove that intention-wise, because it's hard to get a lot of data for operations that are taking place in remote locations. And of course, if you don't care about this in the European context for some reason, although I suppose everyone on this broadcast would be interested in that, we're also seeing the same thing go on in the Taiwan Strait, in which People's Republic of China flagged fishing vessels have cut fiber optic cables connecting to islands that are a part of Taiwan. And again, this is a potential hybrid threat. So interestingly enough, that Svalbard cable cut took place just 6 weeks before Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine. And you can say, well, what sort of communications were going on there? Well, it's not a military site. Svalbard has the Svalsat ground station. It's the northernmost and largest ground station on the planet for this sort of commercial satellite data. And what we saw just 6 weeks later is that, guess what? Ukraine was heavily dependent on commercial satellite data, not military satellite data, but commercial satellite data. Things like Starlink communications, things like Planet and Maxar, they had geospatial imagery, and there's dozens and dozens of other firms that operate in the commercial satellite space now that have come about because of the global space technology renaissance that we've seen in the past 5 to 10 years, but especially in the past couple of years. And so Russia basically had severed one of the two cables going to Svalbard, and halved the amount of data bandwidth that could go up to that site. Again, it's a commercial site, right? Not a military site. This is operated by a company called KSAT in Norway, and again, this shows this sort of hybrid sort of operation and having a direct link to Russia's horrendous invasion of Ukraine that would take place. So that's one of them. I'm happy to go through the other three, but let's keep it at a more discussion pace here.
Absolutely, Benjamin. I totally love how you describe the Russians' way of conducting operations. Like we'll do something which is obviously connected to our interest, but as long as we are not get caught, okay, the West can try to prove that it were us. And of course, as long as the Western countries stick to legal procedures of peaceful time, you cannot prove it. Like remember how long it took to prove in a court that MH17 Malaysian flight was shot down by regular Russian army unit. It took 8 years. 8 years. And Russia say, okay, we don't care. In 8 years, many things can happen. Maybe there will be no Europe. Maybe there will be no Hague. Maybe there will be no NATO. We just do whatever we want to do, because as long as the West tries to prove it were us, they spend a lot of resources. We will use it as a proof by our propaganda that the West is conspiring against us, trying to accuse us in bad things, and in the fact that we're Americans, Ukrainians, I don't know, Germans, Jews, you call them, all possible conspiracy theories, and we win after all, they think, which is understandable. That if we come back to the very question of the strategy of Russian usage of this weapon, attacking of our infrastructure, how protected are our crucial infrastructure pieces? Because please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand as a person who deals pretty closely to this war, we have in the West invested a lot for decades into improvement of our way of life. We have a lot of investment, and we always try to keep the price of running them as low as possible, which is understandable. You cannot have everything military grade protected. Otherwise, like it just doesn't work. And now the Russians say the Europeans and the Americans have that much of infrastructure that is so weakly protected, if protected at all. We can just randomly hit it and enjoy the chaos developing. Because if you hate like just one railway station, the cost of this, even if nobody dies, even if no like train derails, the cost of repairing it and the cost of disturbance in the socioeconomic structure will be that high that we will win after all. And if we hit like in 20, in 30, in 50 places, it will be amazing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Let me just get back to something you said at the start of that question. They absolutely combine infrastructure attacks with disinformation, and they do it in a way that spreads, puts nation against nation. They give rise and give oxygen to far left and far right hate groups. You see a lot of disinformation around these attacks that have to do with anti certain nationalities, anti-immigrant, anti-Semitism, and all of the above, right? And so they're basically trying to spread hatred and division across our societies at a time that we are already polarized, and they're just making it worse and worse and worse with all of this community against community hatred that they're trying to spread. And one of the things that I also point out in this front, on the disinformation front, they try to undermine the energy transition as well, right? So our hope that we can get beyond hydrocarbons at some point to address the climate crisis is endangered by these sort of attacks as well. Because I was out on the island of Bornholm near the two Nord Stream blast sites, okay? And that was something I'm happy to talk about later in this discussion, but I also noticed, not only was I doing the research on the Nord Stream blasts, but at the same time, I saw basically in farmers' fields, there are protest signs painted in Danish saying, we don't want the Danish energy island project to move forward. And what that is, for listeners that aren't aware, is a project in which they want to build more wind power offshore, I believe some solar onshore, but definitely predominantly wind power, windmills offshore in the Baltic Sea around Bornholm. And the pushback from communities is that, we don't want another Nord Stream blast happening near us. So let's not have more energy infrastructure to make us a target. And, the thing that I saw was actually one of those, strikeout things through Danish, the energy island concept, where they're concerned, but the reason they're concerned is the Nord Stream blast. So again, it kind of is a self-fulfilling cycle of disinformation and sabotage that goes on. And frankly, no matter who does any of these things, right? Even if it's something that the Russians may have no connection to at all. Let's say, I don't know, a windmill is cut down and knocked over in a farmer's field in Poland, right? And there's news about it. The Russians will spread disinformation about it, even if it's something where, oh, well, we forgot, it wasn't actually cut down, there was a flood, and the ground gave way, and it was an actual natural disaster. They'll push this. We're seeing disinformation that is no doubt pushed by Russian sources around the two horrific hurricanes we've had in this country, right? And these old, truly Soviet era disinformation notions. We saw Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene come out and say that the government has weather machines that are creating these things. My goodness, this is straight out of early Soviet era, Stalin's playbook, this sort of thing. So it is absolutely not unimaginable that this is what's going on, and it's just horrific that our societies are so polarized, where you have far right groups, far left groups, and hate groups and things like this that are capitalizing on that. Now, that's part one of the answer. Part two, Sergey, you're asking about defense of critical infrastructure. There's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that we can't do, right? You look in the Russian, no country has, including in the Russian Federation, right? There's no country that has all of its critical infrastructure continuously monitored and continuously protected against sabotage. It just simply is impossible. It's not something that we can do nothing about, but it's something we would have a very difficult time protecting simultaneously. Why? And I think it's pretty obvious. We have these systems that are distributed critical infrastructure installations. So whether we're talking about a subsea telecommunications cable, a subsea electricity cable, onshore pipelines, offshore pipelines for natural gas or oil or something like this, or we're talking about rail infrastructure or roadways or things like this. What do they all have in common? They're thousands of kilometers long, and they go through remote regions, and especially in cases that are not used for transportation, there's often very little human activity even around them. They might go through forest, dense forest, and they're built there, and then they're kind of forgotten about unless they have to have monitoring or repair work done once in a while. So how do you stop a low-level criminal from being hired by the GRU, hike tens of kilometers into the middle of a dense forest where there's no one around and just cut a cable, right? That's all you have to do, right? And that's something that is very difficult to protect against continuously, but it can have a significant impact for public mistrust of officials. And then, of course, Russia is fanning the flames of that disinformation and societal unrest. And that's their hope, is to say, to give rise to narratives in the West that we can't trust our own governments and our own officials and our own security personnel to keep us safe. And this is why we need to do more. So can we do something about it? Yes, especially in the offshore environment. We need to increase the dialogue and cooperation between infrastructure providers, infrastructure operators, governments, militaries, intelligence agencies, and law enforcement to synergize this data all into one set, and also use data that can be released very rapidly, unlike government and intelligence and military data from satellites that are classified and then take time to be declassified. We can now use commercial satellite imagery to help rapidly react to national security contingencies and monitoring, and that can lead to quicker attribution because it's all public data to begin with. And so NATO is doing something about this. They started a policy arm office about this. It's the critical offshore subsea infrastructure protection cell at NATO headquarters. They started that in 2023. Earlier this year, about 6 months ago, they opened the operational arm of that same office for subsea infrastructure protection at Markham outside of London. And the UK, for example, has bought a retrofitted commercial subsea infrastructure development vessel to help with monitoring against adversaries and things like this. And there's all sorts of technologies that are being developed now. Autonomous underwater drones that basically can drive up and down infrastructure. But it's never perfect. It's never perfect. But the more that we can get towards attribution is the key to deterring this in the future. And Sergej, I hope you will ask me about NATO Article 4, because that is something that we need to talk about in this as well.
Yeah, we will do it. We'll do it for sure. The only thing I want to say to those who watch us on Twitter, on X, I have totally forgotten to change the name of the stream show, so it is shown as the discussion about Israel-Iranian relations. I have tried to change it now. Maybe there will be like a sort of a stop of the stream, but then it will start again. So we will do it right now, and there will be right name, so people who are watching us on X will be able to see it. Okay. I hope there will. We are sorting now it again, like on the X, and I hope that the broadcasting will be restored. Yeah, now it's restored with the correct title. And for those who will join us on X, on Twitter, we are talking to Dr. Benjamin L. Schmitt, who is an energy network security expert. He's a fellow at CEPA, Center for European Policy Analysis. He is also an expert at the Uni Pennsylvania, and he worked at the Energy Department of the United States Energy
Bureau.
Directorate or energy team.
I was at the Bureau of Energy Resources at the U.S. Department of State.
U.S. Department of State is the most important thing here. So you really know the stuff. You really know what is going on. And don't forget to write your comments on YouTube, write your commentaries on Twitter. And we are talking about how Russian sabotage affects European security, energy security, communication security, transport security. And Benjamin, we have talked already about like how Russians hire people in Europe to cut our lines, to participate in terror attacks. We know that some of these people have been arrested. So it's not just like some media wrote about it and we are speculating if it's true or not. No, some Russian agents have been arrested. About 2 months ago, 2 Russian citizens have been arrested in Bavaria, southern Germany, where they were preparing attacks against Ukrainian soldiers who were trained there at a military basis. We know that unidentified drones fly over Germany's military bases, like on regular basis. And we ask, okay, like who can do it? Maybe Russia, I guess so. So you also said that one of the reasons why we cannot stop it is just we cannot prove it. But is there any option to do the same? Like you have mentioned by yourself that energy and transport networks are that vulnerable to attacks because they are long and there are a lot of empty areas where you have a pipeline. This pipeline can be damaged. But Russia is the country with extremely low density of population and extremely long communication networks.
Mhm.
Who stops the West from just telling the Russians, okay, either you stop doing what you're doing, or you have the Baikal Siberia train line with a lot of tunnels. Just imagine something bad happens to one or two of your tunnels. The whole communication system between Russia's controlled Far East and Central Russia will be just stopped. Why don't we do this?
Well, look, I think that we're far away from anything like that, Sergey. What I called on U.S. Congress to do was to pressure the Biden administration and to some extent the Schultz chancellery, because I believe those are the two that have been considered the quote unquote escalation managers of this Western support for Ukraine's victory ultimately, which neither have actually publicly signed up for supporting something considered Ukrainian victory, which is an absolute travesty. But they've done so also when it comes to Russia's quote unquote shadow war against NATO, where we see many of these incidents taking place on NATO soil. They have been proven, they have been attributed. Not all of them, right? We're talking about hundreds of these incidents over the past few years, but a significant number, a critical mass of them have been proven they fully and as you said, Sergey, legal proceedings and arrests have been made against either Russian nationals or GRU hired non-Russian nationals operating in NATO territory to sabotage these infrastructure facilities. And that is enough, in my view, and I think in the view of a lot of experts in the transatlantic community. I was just at the Warsaw Security Forum and moderated a panel with multiple security officials and a CEO of a Polish telecoms company. And the idea is that we really have some tool to use, which is NATO Article 4. And for listeners that don't know what that is, you're probably familiar with NATO's Article 5 contingency, which is an attack on one NATO ally is an attack on all, and that's the main premise that undergirds the power and the political resolve of NATO. Something that President Biden regularly talks about as a sacred bond, a sacred trust that we have, a vow that we've made to NATO, and that's wonderful. But NATO Article 4 is separate from that, and that basically says if any NATO member state feels that its its sovereignty, its its security, anything like this are endangered in any way, then NATO can have either individual member states or groups of member states file for Article 4, which is a consultative mechanism in which they would have public consultations at NATO headquarters about what to do, and part of that is acknowledging that you have a problem. Right? NATO is definitely talking about this. There's no question, right? The national security officials are talking about it in the media. What we haven't seen is taking that next step and saying, using an official NATO channel, Article 4, we are calling out the Russian Federation and trying to deter them through saying, we know what you're doing, and NATO itself is going to take political action to talk about this and basically show our resolve. And you could easily have let's say these four countries: Poland, the Czech Republic, France, and the United Kingdom. They've all had recent high profile sabotage incidents, arson attacks, cuts, things like this that have gone on that have been attributed legally and publicly to Russia backed or Russian actors. And so that's enough. You have that block of countries say we need to have NATO Article 4, and then so you have it. What I've heard from folks is that there are certain member states that are pushing against having NATO Article 4 because they see that as too escalatory. And those member states, of course, are the same ones that are not committing to Ukrainian victory and slow rolling and always in this one step behind sort of mode for supporting Ukraine. And it's in particular been the Biden administration and the Schultz chancellery. And that's unfortunate. So I hope that will change. I called on Congress specifically to call on the Biden administration to support member states if they have had attributed acts against infrastructure in their countries that Russia has been attributed to, or Russian hired actors have been attributed to, that NATO Article 4 can be used. We need that to happen, absolutely. And so that's absolutely where our focus, I think, needs to be. And that again, that deterrent is part of part of the attribution process, right? So you're basically, it's a back and forth between attribution and deterrence. The more that you have attribution towards Russia, the less it can freely operate and deny plausibly to the public that this sort of thing is going on. And also that can be an antidote against disinformation that Russia has surrounding these infrastructure attacks.
That is extremely important, I think, what he said, at this level of understanding of the severity of the situation, and are we into real conflict/war with Russia? Because in Germany, many believe that we are able to decide if we are in war against Russia or we are not. I always say, no, you cannot decide it, because the moment you are in war with Russia is the moment when Russia says we are in war. And Russia has said it already. And the Russians know they are in war against NATO, not against Ukraine only. But there is still no understanding of that in the broad circles of the German society. And what I found shocking, it is today published at Germany's Bild-Zeitung, popular tabloid in Germany, which is still very good in covering topics of Ukraine, much better than many other German media. And this newspaper, which many people in Germany just reject, saying, oh, it's not serious, it's sensational, it's not a serious journalist. But exactly this newspaper has found out that German military participated in an international sport event, which is called International Military Games or something like that. I don't know why militaries want to have their own Olympics, but probably they want to. And they were in February this year, 2 years after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. There were military games, sport games in Bangladesh. And Germany's team participated in these games together with the Russian military team, which was not expelled from this competition in contrary to the Olympics. And what makes it much worse, there was a group photo of all the athletes in their military uniforms. And the German team in German military uniforms was standing just the next row to the Russian team. So just imagine, like 5 Russian soldiers in full military uniform were staying for the group photo, and beneath them there were like 5 or 6 German military members in Germany uniform. They were all smiling. So this photo was leaked recently, and the Bild-Zeitung has published it, and now Germany's Minister of Defense Pistorius said Germany pulls back from this event. But just let me say it once again, nobody of these German soldiers, of these officers, even questioned the fact, why should we smile staying next to Russian soldiers who maybe last week were raping Ukrainian women or cutting heads of Ukrainian prisoners of war? And that is the level of misunderstanding, of not understanding of what's going on. And when after that you ask the German politicians, are you ready for a confrontation against Russia? Is your infrastructure is protected against the Russian attacks? They will say you nothing, because they just never think about it.
Yeah, it's very, very, very concerning, everything you said. And this is why I have also reminded U.S. Congress during my testimony, and have said it in the press. I have written about it with Ambassador John Herbst in Foreign Policy magazine just a few weeks ago as well. We can't allow Germany, and Germany can't allow itself to return to, quote, energy business as usual or any business as usual with the Russian Federation. And unfortunately, there are more and more elements, of course, in Germany's far right and far left, the AfD, the Bundesrat Wagenknecht, the BSV.
Basically.
Yeah, as the so AfD and BSV, the far left, far right, and far left groups, of course, have been pro-Russian, but this is trickling towards the center as well. And you don't even have to go that far. The SPD has, of course, for many years been a conduit for Russian pro-Russian sentiment and pro-Russian policies. You and I have talked about this in the past, Sergey. Of course, you have Gerhard Schroeder greenlighting Nord Stream, stepping out and becoming the chairman of Nord Stream AG, and then working for other Russian state-owned enterprises, Gazprom and Rosneft. You have Austrian Foreign Minister Karen Kneißl, who invited Putin to her wedding while she was in office, danced with him at her wedding, and then has since gone on after leaving office to work for
who bowed to him, who performed this very high formal bow gesture, bowing to Vladimir Putin.
It's disgusting. I'll leave it at that. Worked for Rosneft. Former Austrian Chancellor Christian Kern wrote a letter to U.S. Congress along with then Vice Chancellor Sigmar Gabriel of Germany, who has rehabilitated himself somehow into a transatlanticist, working as the head of the Atlantikbrücke and other organizations like this. But of course, very publicly went to the Kremlin in 2015 and had a meeting with Putin, which was reported by the Kremlin, that he said effectively that he will try to keep all of the jurisdiction of Nord Stream 2's development within German competency, and the implication of that being not allowing the EU to really object to it from a legal basis or an anti-monopoly basis, things like this. So anyways, Christian Kern and Gabriel wrote this letter against the Nord Stream 2 sanctions that were involved in the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CATSA, of 2017 that Congress put out. And of course, Christian Kern left office and he became a well-paid member of the board of Russian Railways, another state-owned enterprise. Francois Fillon, the former French prime minister, went to work for not one but two Russian state-owned oil and gas trading firms. And the former econ minister of Austria, Hans-Georg Schelling, went to work for Nord Stream 2 AG as an advisor after leaving office as well. So again, I have many times called for something called the SHAME Act in the United States to be passed, the Stop Helping Adversaries Meddle in Everything Act, which of course, if personal shame doesn't work, then you need a law to stop this sort of practice of leaving the public trust and working for our adversaries, and in particular, Russian state-owned enterprises. And so that still hasn't been made illegal in every jurisdiction. Certainly is not illegal in the US fully. And it definitely is not illegal in Germany. We need to start by passing a law here in the United States that covers our own bases and try to have that start a norm-setting process where other legislatures pass this, parliaments pass this across the transatlantic community. I've called on Canada to do this, the European Parliament, et cetera. So, this is something that's ongoing. We have to do our homework now because, Sergey, I think you have much to say on this, but there are definitely corners and growing corners in German society that do want this return to business as usual, not only in energy, but overall with the Russian Federation. And it is terrifying, frankly, for transatlantic security.
Absolutely. And for the fans of my fellow compatriots, Germans, there are a lot of people in Germany, and actually, according to survey polls, a strong majority of Germans who are pro-Ukrainian, who want more weapons for Ukraine.
Yep.
Even in his own party, our Chancellor Olaf Scholz has not full support. His support is under 50% within his party, and in the society, it's about 20%. His party has about 14% of the support, but still, Chancellor Scholz is in power, and we have recently appointed a new general secretary of the Social Democratic Party, Matthias Mirsch. And Matthias Mirsch is a person who literally wrote in 2019 an official statement saying that Nord Stream 2 is extremely important for Germany, and saying that those who want to stop it just want to work for the US. And this is incredibly strong anti-Americanism among those circles who want to go to business as usual with Russia. Because Matthias Mirsch literally called purchasing of liquefied natural gas, LNG, from the US a bigger threat compared to dependency on gas from Russia. And I need to ask you, how can you be that clearly stupid or that clearly uh, integrated into Russian influence networks to say in 2019 that US LNG is a bigger threat compared to Russian gas? And another question, how can you be that stupid or that integrated in Russia's propaganda networks when you when you call this person in 2024 and appoint him as a general secretary of Germany's ruling party?
I don't know what you want me to say, Sergey. That kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? But yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
And Benjamin,
yeah.
I know that you had like a sort of also a very strong discussion with some German politicians, exactly on the same thing.
Yeah. Well, look, there's a number of things that we've seen. Obviously, this notion that U.S. LNG is more of a threat than Russian energy dependence is farcical because it overlooks the fact that Germany and the United States are treaty allies under NATO. Okay, we support one another. We are arguably, especially in the Biden administration, who I have disagreed with on some Europe policy and policy to support Ukraine, simply because it has deferred to Germany and German SPD leadership on slow rolling aid to Ukraine in many cases. I've publicly said, some of Biden's Europe policy seems to have been made in Berlin over the years, right? It waived sanctions on Nord Stream 2 to begin with, right? So that's concerning, but I think they have tried to evolve a little bit away from that. We'll see if Vice President Harris wins the presidency, whether that will continue or not. Obviously, there's strong concerns with what Donald Trump would do, which I don't really think we need to get into here, but that's part of it. And so I remind the listeners, we don't have something in this country, in the United States, called America Prom. We don't have state champions. We don't have state-owned enterprises. And so as much as the Russians and Russian energy fans across Europe would like to project how the Russians operate with their state-owned enterprises and project that on the United States, we do not have the ability to pick up the phone, right? I couldn't pick up the phone in the State Department and call Cheniere on the Gulf Coast and say, all right, send a cargo of LNG to the Klaipėda terminal in Lithuania, the new Independence terminal. Wouldn't that be a great signal that we're supporting Europe's energy security and pushing back on Russia? I know that the Lithuanians would have wanted that, right? To have the first cargo ever at their terminal, I think in 2016, that they received it, come from the United States, but it didn't. And the reason it didn't come from the United States was simply because A, the government doesn't have any jurisdiction over where our companies sell their product. Obviously, we have sanctions and technology export controls, but for the most part, they do this on a purely economic and open market and capitalist basis. So when you look at where natural gas has been sold around the world since we started exporting natural gas in 2016, which was almost 18 months after Nord Stream 2 was re-announced in 2015. So when they started these talking points, we didn't even have the ability in the US to export any LNG at all, period. But the disinformation was started ahead of time because Gazprom was so concerned about its own market share. Well, where did U.S. gas go? Mostly to South America and Southeast Asia, because that's where the product was most sought after from an economic basis. And that's good for Europe's energy security. They didn't have to directly buy gas from the United States because by virtue of us, the United States, selling to South America and Southeast Asia, that frees up other LNG around the world to go to Europe. And it made LNG a much more fungible asset in the past decade than it was before then. So I always thought that this is not only wrong, but disingenuous. And what can I say? It's Russian disinformation. And there's certainly, Sergey, a significant anti-American element of this. And I've had many run-ins with German politicians about this over the years, both when I was in government and since being in government. And sadly, I am a former German Fulbright fellow. I worked at the Max Planck Institute for Kernphysik. My family's originally from Germany, and I have basically dedicated much of my academic career to U.S.-German science relations, physics relations, and things like this. It's unfortunate that when I got in government, I had to disagree so strongly on the Russia policy that Germany has had, and I think that some of these SPD politicians have really thought of me as an opponent, but really what I'm trying to do is help push Germany in what I think is a much much more secure direction. I don't care if Europe ever buys a molecule of U.S. natural gas. I really don't. I just care that they are not being harassed by Russia, harassed by other authoritarian nations. This course is going to go on with the People's Republic of China and other industrial goods and things like this in the future. So these are the sort of decisions that I think will make Europe more secure and therefore make the United States more secure going forward. So that's kind of how I've looked at this over the years.
That is exactly what many in Germany prefer to either ignore or not to know or to misinterpret. This is this dichotomy of, okay, like the Americans are as bad as Russians. They both are imperialists, and we just want to deal with Russia because we have much more influence on Russia, because Russia is not that strong, but we don't want to deal with America because the US they act too independently. We cannot work with them on the same level. And that is absolutely weird concept because Russia is an aggressive terrorist regime and the United States is a democracy. But okay, like some people believe in things which do not exist, and that's the case. But what wonders me a lot is that we have proven cases of Russian hostile actions in Europe, including usage of chemical nerve agents, practically chemical weapons against the Skripals in London.
Yeah, are chemical weapons. Definitely.
Yeah, like the Russians killed Litvinenko using a radioactive substance and just making the whole district in London dangerous for being there. Russians used nerve agent to trying to kill two people of Skripal's family. They haven't managed to kill them, but they have managed to kill two persons, British persons on the British soil, who were just bystanders and who were who came into a direct contact with the gas, with the liquid. And we had like a German candidate to chancellorship, Armin Laschet, who just denied it, who said like, no, Russians could not have tried to kill Skripals. It's all bullshit. And then we had other things. We had explosions of ammunition depots in Czechia with several people killed in the warehouse. We had an attempt to kill a Bulgarian business person with the same nerve agent Novichok. We had other similar cases where one could say, okay, with the probability of like 99%, they were Russians. Yep. And still we have people in Germany and in Europe overall who say, okay, why do we need to protect our infrastructure? The Russians will not dare to attack it. They will not dare to strike our airports. They will not dare to strike our energy system. They will not dare to strike our transport. But at the same time, we have like some groups, activist groups, who already strike it. Like this year, I was flying from Frankfurt to New York, and the runway in Frankfurt Airport was blocked for many hours because a group of environmental activists just came to the runway. And then I asked myself, my first, yeah,
they glued themselves to the runway.
Yes, they glued themselves to the runway, which they typically do. But my question was, okay, just imagine for a second that this group of people were not environmental activists. You may like them or not, but they were non-violent. But just imagine it was a Russian commando with machine guns and RPGs and manpads, and they were just like start and shoot down the planes which descend and ascend. You can kill thousands of people by that. You can ignite the fuel depot, etc. You can kill people, a lot of people, and this means that Frankfurt Airport is not protected at all, the largest airport in Germany, one of the largest in Europe. So tell me, Benjamin, why is our energy infrastructure is not protected in Europe? And frankly speaking, I guess that in the US, it is not being protected more.
Well, I think that, again, I try to stress to the audience, I think whether you're in the United States, Europe, Russia, China, anywhere, it's hard. Look, power lines, these are distributed pieces of infrastructure that are in remote environments. They're hard to protect no matter who you are, where you are on the planet. And they're not built for military protection, right? That's not what they were built for. So there's things you can do to reinforce, to make more resilient these pieces of infrastructure, and certainly there's a lot of sad but in tragic incidents going on in Ukraine, where Russia is openly striking against energy and critical infrastructure, but in particular energy infrastructure. We've seen 80% of the thermal power capacity be knocked out. We've seen 50% of the electricity grid. There's now planned grid scale blackouts for citizens. Sergej, of course, you're in Ukraine. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We haven't done enough to push back on Russia on that front to begin with, right? We need to allow for the Ukrainians to have the abilities to strike the sites that are striking its energy infrastructure. And for those that don't care about this from a moral or standing up for a democracy or freedom perspective of supporting Ukraine, and shame on you if you're one of those people, but let's say you are, we all know examples of politicians that are thinking of this more in, let's say, economic pragmatic terms. Well, it's going to cost you a hell of a lot more to rebuild the entire Ukrainian energy network than protect it now. And how are you going to protect it? Air defense. I keep getting asked, what is my #1 energy security recommendation for Ukraine? Every winter that this bloody war, large-scale invasion has continued, and it has been air defense, period. And I think that a lot of folks...
I would also add long-range strikes against Russian airfields.
Yes, that was the second thing. So you have two things, right? You have air defense systems to protect the infrastructure. It's not possible to maybe cover every square inch of Ukraine, but you can increase the number of Patriot missile batteries and things like this around key sites and key pieces of infrastructure. And then the other way of doing this is striking the facilities on Russian territory with longer range missiles, whether it be Storm Shadows or ATACMS, that are targeting that infrastructure to begin with. So we need to allow both of those things to happen. And that's the energy security strategy. I think that I get these questions from folks on Ukrainian energy security. And guess what? It's not a Bloomberg terminal approach to a market's decision of how to support Ukraine's energy security right now. And it's the sort of distributed energy infrastructure through energy transition policies and renewables. That's all very important, and that can help. Just decentralizing, the renewable infrastructure. That's going to take time. In the shortest possible term, though, the energy security strategy, unfortunately, is simply a military strategy where we have to protect the infrastructure itself. And so those are the sort of things that we're learning from Ukraine, again, in a tragic way, but we are learning in things that we have to consider if there were ever an attack on NATO by Russia directly, of how to protect these pieces of infrastructure, both passively through passive defenses and actively through air defense and other ground-based defenses. So that's so important in this, and part of why we have to do more to support Ukraine's victory. And for everyone out there that is asking about how do we, what is the biggest thing we can do to push back on Russia's sabotage campaign against critical infrastructure? It's not just policy like NATO Article 4, it's also supporting Ukrainian victory. That's our biggest lever to push back on Russia right now. And we should remember every single time we think about this, what can we do? Well, you can always enforce sanctions more. We don't have enough sanctions officials in the United States or Europe combined to do as good a job as we need. Even if there's no political decisions to go quote unquote soft on sanctions, the number of officials we have is insufficient, because we're talking about the largest sanctions regime in the history of humanity with this Russia sanctions regime. And those sanctions officials are covering the entire globe, not just Russia. So that's number one. And number two, making sure that we support Ukraine faster and faster with what we can do to support its victory from a military procurement and supply standpoint. We need to build up our military industrial base in the West. We need to support Ukraine's own capacity to contribute to this. And again, I told Congress this, we are on an X-1 equation when it comes to supporting Ukraine, meaning X is whatever position that we should have taken or weapon system we should have given or anything sanction we should have enforced. We should have been doing at any given moment, and X-1 is where we are. In other words, one step behind, and maybe even not only one step behind temporally in terms of timing, but also one step behind in terms of the amount, right, that we're doing. And so we need to do a lot more on that front too, Sergej.
Absolutely. And once again, it is an equalization because Russia, and let us speak frankly, we know that it is Russia. We know that it is Russia, it's Russian interest. We have a lot of evidence. And if we don't have a first-hand signed Putin's declaration that he was personally responsible and personally ordered to do this, we have a lot of evidences starting from Russian people being arrested for this, seeing all the Telegram networks bribing people, paying them money for attacks. We know it's Russia. And as you have described, this Chinese vessel, which was fishing back and forth for hours and days.
It was a Russian vessel.
Russian vessel. Sorry, Russian
Yeah.
vessel. Sailing back and forth for hours or days before, as long as it took to destroy the cable. Okay, you can say it was a pretty stupid captain, who didn't know what to do. But if you add 1 and 1, you always get 2 and not -4, and that all points to Russia. So my question once again is, how can we stop it? We can try to invest money into protecting our infrastructure, into making more surveillance, into creating a parallel networks to be sure that in a case something is broken, we have a parallel transport or energy network functioning. But we also can make Russia suffer. We can also start to make Russia's life more complicated, attacking Russia's infrastructure. Because in this competition, if Russia feels that they can harm us and they don't get punished, they say, okay, we send as much agents as we want to. Some will succeed, some will not. But after all, even if only one agent succeeds, we still are in plus, we still are in profit. But if it's an equal game, Russian resources will end way faster than our resources. And my question is, once again, why we don't do it? Why there is no political will to do it? It's about the lives of our people. I say, if Russians start hacking our hospitals, people will die. If Russians start hacking our energy system, people can die again because someone will don't have enough energy in the hospital to run a heart surgery.
Yeah, well, first of all, you said we need to speak frankly on this. I thought we were speaking frankly for the past almost hour and a half. So just to be clear, we've been speaking frankly. Just it's for those that are listening. I mean, look, when you're talking about this in terms of human lives, obviously the most human lives that are being lost are being lost in Ukraine. And so that's where our focus has to be in terms of pushback. We need to support Ukraine to win. We need to support Ukraine to evict Russian military from the territory of Ukraine. And we need to do as much as we can in terms of economic sanctions and technology export controls to take off the field of battle for the Russians the ability to field technical instrumentation of war, military equipment, materiel against Ukraine, and also deprive Russia of the ability to purchase this through macroeconomic failures across their economy. I think we're getting closer on the macroeconomic side, but I remind folks, this takes time. This is not instantaneous, and so we need to keep with it. But Sergej, you're talking about the threats to human lives. It's been I think sheer luck that none of these infrastructure attacks that I'm aware of have caused injury or harm to EU or EU citizens or citizens within NATO member states. Look, I was at a conference in January of this year. I've told this story a couple of times. In terms of trying to illustrate that this can have a low level but direct impact on people's lives. And so I was at it was in Bonn, Germany, at a conference that was being held at the AIA think tank in Bonn, the International Affairs Institute. And we were having a meeting on Nord Stream 2 retrospective policy, critical infrastructure protection, energy infrastructure protection, and supporting Ukraine. And I needed to take a flight the second day of that conference home to the United States from the Frankfurter Flughafen, the Frankfurt airport. And the quickest way to get back would have been going from Siegburg, Bonn to Frankfurter Flughafen in the ICE, the high-speed rail line. And so I could basically leave the last session of the conference and go home. I had to leave early because as I was booking tickets during the morning session of the conference, that line had all of its train schedule announcements be canceled. And they all said vandalismus, right? Every single in red text, vandalismus. In other words, sabotage on that line. And what happened was the energy cables, the electricity cables for that high-speed rail line had been cut in a sabotage attack. And so I had to leave early and go on a regional rail to get back, and I made it fine and no problem. But again, as you said, Sergey, imagine that train was going by and somehow that caused a derailment. People can die, right? You have telecommunications going down. Not only can that cause civil unrest, imagine if the cell networks go down in a country for 5 minutes, 5 hours, or 5 days. You start to get to serious unrest situations going on, given how much we rely on those sort of telecommunications. But at the same time, people can die because of it, because they can't get in touch with emergency services, or there's some sort of vandalism on a roadway, so police or first responders, firefighters, or medical personnel can't get to victims that need care. These are things we have to think about, and so it's been almost a miracle and sheer luck that this hasn't happened in a way that has resulted in people's lives being lost, at least none that I'm aware of. But it's only a matter of time before it does, and I don't think you have to go anywhere near a open, effectively military attack against NATO critical infrastructure, Sergey, as you've mentioned on this this podcast, to get to something that unintentionally does effectively the same thing. And I will remind the audience as well, another piece of infrastructure that's been targeted, but thankfully had been foiled. There was a cache of explosives and detonators found deliberately buried next to the NATO pipeline network west of Heidelberg, Germany. And the NATO pipeline network, for those of you who don't know, is a dedicated oil and refined products pipeline network that was built during the Soviet era, during the Cold War, and basically has oil and refined products that can be moved around. Unfortunately, it needs to be extended all the way through eastern flank countries, but for right now, it still stops at the Fulda Gap, where it was built up until the 90s, and so that was targeted. That's a specific piece of NATO infrastructure that could have a direct military impact on our ability to protect civilians in the case of any sort of Russian contingency on the European continent outside of Ukraine. So, all of these things are reasons why the biggest thing we can do to push back is making sure that Ukraine wins.
Absolutely, and I get here notifications from audience that quality on YouTube is not good, but on X, on Twitter, it's better. I need to apologize. I'm now broadcasting from Ukraine, and normally in Ukraine you have very good internet connection, but today, this evening, it seems that my internet provider suffers from some troubles. Please forgive. And once again, that is another sign that we need functioning infrastructure. And Ukraine's infrastructure is suffering a lot from Russian attacks. And Russians, just a reminder, Russians tried to hit Ukraine's infrastructure years before the full-scale invasion. The first full-scale attacks, cyber attacks on infrastructure in Europe, if you don't count like the DDoS attacks in Estonia in 2003 or 4, I guess. But the first attacks on infrastructure using viruses was in Ukraine, as Russians have infected a Ukrainian provider of bookkeeping services, Medoc, I think the name was it virus.
Not Petya? Was it not Petya part of that as well?
It was NotPetya, yeah. NotPetya
Yeah.
was a virus which was like the Russians tried to install it, like to inject it in some software programs which are being used all over Ukraine, and they have managed. They were very successful because they have managed to infect Medoc bookkeeping system, which is practically a must-be bookkeeping system which is installed on any or almost any Ukrainian business entity. And the moment when the bookkeepers across all the country installed an update for this bookkeeping system, which they received like normally every couple of months, the virus, which was previously injected into this bookkeeping system without knowledge, of course, of the bookkeeping company, it was installed on the computers, and it was a total blackout in Ukraine. Like subway in Kyiv didn't work, several power plants were shut down, small businesses could not operate anymore because they could not do anything. They could not just access their databases, client databases, industry software, anything. So the whole country was just hit by an attack of unprecedented scale. And I'm absolutely sure that the Russians would love to repeat it with any European country, just for doing that, not even like to attack the country immediately, but just because they know if they cause harm, it weakens their opponents and it makes the life of our citizens more complicated.
Yeah, I have to remember and tell the audience that that this happened at the outset of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 as well. In February 2022, just hours before the tanks began to roll for the large scale invasion, you had an attack, a cyber attack against the telecommunications and Viasat satellite communications provider that would have supported Ukrainian communications during the the initial phase of Russian invasion, but that quickly spilled over. Right, it's space-based infrastructure that had a security incident on it, led by a Russian cyber attack that then took out and spilled over into European infrastructure. We saw thousands of windmills get taken down in Germany as a result of that. And so these things can spiral very, very quickly. Obviously, we saw that with NotPetya as well. But there are real, energy, telecommunications, transportation, and other infrastructure damage. And of course, that includes the international financial system because of the integrated way in which telecommunications are a part of that as well. And all of these things put together have a very, very high level of success in creating small scale, medium scale, and large scale social unrest.
Yeah, we have now another message, and a person who's watching us on X on Twitter, because quality on Twitter is better than on YouTube. He just writes me a direct message, and he says, first, many greetings to Dr. Ban from us. And my question is, if this concerted bashing of the Green Party by pro-Russian bots may be related to their vision of a green and somehow decentralized energy supply, solar on the roof, battery in the basement. This would make Germany less vulnerable comparing to Ukraine. Is it a point?
Yeah, it is absolutely a point. And yeah, there have been far right attacks on green movements, and that's a danger. Look, we at the end of the day, I lecture on energy geopolitics and national security. I teach a class that's called that here at the University of Pennsylvania. We have to remember that the energy transition is not immune to what's going on, right? Climate crisis policies are not immune to what's going on, and I talk to other academics about this to try to integrate more and more as we talk about the confluence of energy security, and national security issues. We see that when we separately talk about climate justice and social justice issues related to supporting the energy transition, the climate crisis, we see the merits of that. We need to push those two pieces of the Venn diagram together, because as I said, if we don't have energy security, and if you have energy poverty that is brought on by authoritarian nations like Russia or the People's Republic of China against their adversaries, it undermines their democratic resilience. And at the same time, energy poverty immediately undermines the ability of policymakers, for example, the German Greens, from advancing policies that will get us to a post-hydrocarbon economy and address the climate crisis as we have to. So we need to have national security as a part of the energy justice, climate justice framework. I wrote a cover article for ICHEM, which is a climate and energy think tank in Berlin, in their monthly journal a few months ago, about 6 months ago, that was directly on this. And I've also published a English language version of it with the Climate Center for Energy Policy here at Penn. And so you can read about that. But again, we can't look at these things anymore as decentralized issues because our adversaries do not. Okay. And I think we are vulnerable in the sense that democracies don't think about these issues together. They often think about them in very stovepipe ways, especially traditional military policy, traditional national security policy, traditional law enforcement policy. They all kind of, they sit in their own areas. Russia doesn't think of it that way. China doesn't think of it that way. Iran doesn't think of it that way. North Korea doesn't think of it that way because they have a command economy. They have a authoritarian governmental structure where all of these ministries basically can work together and create these cross-cutting threats that create threats in various lanes that we don't know still how to push back on, because we really kind of pull one of those levers at a time to respond instead of all at once. And so we need to keep thinking about all of the ways in which we respond to authoritarian threats as a multispectral threat vector. We need a multidisciplinary response at the same time. So yes, that's going on. To the listener's question, decentralizing energy infrastructure in that way, the solar panel on the roof, the battery in the basement, absolute, important for energy infrastructure protection, absolute importance for deterring infrastructure attacks or the efficacy of those. We also have to remember, even let's say that we were fully beyond the hydrocarbon era. There's no oil, there's no gas, we're fully dependent on renewables. We need to remember that we also have to have national security protection of those assets as well, because let's say you have a wind farm in the North Sea that has 1,000 windmills. Okay, that's great. That means that it's very unlike a natural gas pipeline that you can drag an anchor and break, like we saw in the case of the Baltic Connector pipeline in 2023 in the Gulf of Finland. That's harder to do, right? Because an adversary would have to take out more and more and more of these windmills to have an impact. And so you say, okay, well, that's great, right? They can, maybe if they take out 2 or 3 of them or knock them over or disable them, that's not going to have a big impact on the actual energy generation capacity. However, they have subsea transformers and telecommunication support and of course high voltage electricity lines to bring that power to the continent onshore, and that can be a target as well. So again, the energy geopolitics, the critical infrastructure protection does not end at the end of hydrocarbons. And I always, because I started my career working in a fusion research lab at the University of Rochester's Laboratory for Laser Energetics. I think that's where we have to be to get to a fully sustainable future in terms of post post hydrocarbons and having a base load for renewables. But we won't do it if we keep underfunding the research that's needed for those sort of solutions to get there. And I think that hopefully we will ultimately get there. But even still, the geopolitics isn't over, because the fuels for that, those systems, and this is a little bit more science fiction, but becoming science fact, and maybe a little bit dramatic to say, but there's already plans by the People's Republic of China to go and mine helium-3 from the lunar regolith, and that's something that's been deposited over thousands, millions of years from solar wind hitting the regolith, the surface of the lunar, the moon, and that's a resource we have in scarce amounts on the ground here on Earth, and that can be a key fuel for future fusion facilities. So again, a little bit dramatic, but I'm just trying to illustrate that energy geopolitics does not end anytime soon. In our resource competition, whether it's for hydrocarbons now, whether it's for critical minerals for battery storage, grid-scale battery storage, and renewable energy technologies and systems, kind of in the next few years, or fusion fuels and technologies in the future, we will have geopolitical competition related to energy, no matter what.
Yes, exactly. And I need to add here that I'm not very happy with how the Green Party deals with the Russian threat. I think that the Greens have served for way too long and are still serving to Chancellor Scholz as the party which practically supports him in his chancellorcy. And Chancellor Scholz I think, is a threat for Germany and threat for Europe, because he's too weak on Russia, and he practically bans a lot of things which could have helped Ukraine. And the Greens not opposing him on a very practical level of challenging him and challenging his chancellorcy, and trying to appoint another one. There is a legal procedure for that in Germany. They are practically complicit to what he's doing. They are in his government. But the Greens were the only party which was openly opposing Nord Stream 2 even before the full-scale invasion.
Yep, that's
and
right.
That is solid fact. There is no single party in Germany, even the Christian Democratic Union, which is now playing a very crucial role in challenging Scholz, but even they have not opposed Nord Stream 2, and the Social Democrats are still in support some sort of Russia, and the person who was personally responsible for making this project real, Manuela Schwesig. She's still president of the region Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, the governor in that region. So the Greens are the only party who were opposing it. And we have a question also from the same person. So Russia is, I quote, "So Russia is, by economic interest and their military agenda, the biggest opponent of European counter-climate change actions." Well, before you answer, Benjamin, I need to add that Russia's war against Ukraine has caused that impact. Like if we exclude the cost of human lives and suffering and deaths and stolen years and years of life, if we even exclude all that, Russia's war against Ukraine has caused the environmental damage I don't know comparable to what. Russians have destroyed nature of the Black Sea. We know that there are no dolphins anymore there because of explosions. Russians have transformed the whole landscapes of Ukraine, forests, into deserts by shelling them. Russians have poisoned rivers in Ukraine. Even deliberately now, Russians try to stop Ukrainian offensive in Kursk by pouring missile, like rocket fuel, into the river, in a hope that it will go like downstream and will kill Ukrainians in Kiev, because this river goes then directly to Dnipro and then to Kiev. So they have killed every single piece of life on the distance of like 200 kilometers. There is no fish, no nothing in that river, because Russians pull tons and tons of rocket fuel into this river. And then you may add the price of rebuilding Ukraine, concrete production, production of steel, like all construction works, which cost a lot of not only money but environmental damage. So Russians really destroyed world environment for decades. Think about gas and oil they burn, about burning oil deposits, etc. It's terrible. It's just terrible. So Russians are destroying our world environment for sure. But the question was for you, Benjamin, not for me. I'm sorry for have been that talkative.
No, I agree with all of that. I'll just add on to that list of horrific acts that the Russians have taken against the environment and against the climate. And I think anyone who thinks that is in the climate diplomacy world that thinks that the Russians have any intention of addressing the climate crisis is severely misguided, I think, at this point, because of the proven track record they've had against it. They also blew up the Novokhovka Dam and created an ecocide, the likes of which we haven't seen on this planet in just a short period of time, not only destroying the environment, but of course, killing thousands of people in the process through the floods and the downstream impacts of that. So that's important to remember. We also have to remember, you mentioned Manuel Schwesig. So the Russians also try to undermine the spirit of climate action through things like they did to support Nord Stream 2, because they set up a fake climate foundation, a Klimastiftung, the Klima- und Umweltstiftung MV, the Climate and Environmental Foundation Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. And what they did was they set up a shell NGO called the Klimastiftung, which specifically used millions and millions of dollars in Nord Stream 2 AG money, which of course is Gazprom money, because it's 100% state-owned by Gazprom, the Nord Stream 2 AG company in Zug, Switzerland, and used it to try to create a quasi-governmental NGO to get around US sanctions. And even though US sanctions were written specifically with this in mind, because of course this scheme was out in public and reported on the media, early and often, they were able to put this on the books and hire a ship called the Blue Ship. It's now called the Blue Sky, trying to change its name just enough to get away from sanctions in the future. And they were able to get the Biden administration to not sanction the entity or that vessel, even though it was specifically creating a deceptive structure to get around US sanctions. And so I think that decision, maybe even more than the original decision to waive sanctions on Nord Stream 2 in July of 2021, might have even longer term impact of our counter threat financing regimes and our counter sanctions regimes against authoritarian nations globally. Because what this has shown is that an authoritarian nation can basically partner with a malign regional government or with a government with malign intentions, in this case, that would basically give a significant amount of money, partner with a very little amount of public money in the regional or local government of a nation that is allied with the United States, and then have those officials then go to the United States or go to the EU, go to Brussels and say, you can't sanction us. Look, it's a government thing. It's a government entity. And indeed, it's technically a government entity, but just a little tiny bit of government money goes towards it. But in fact, it's just Gazprom money in this case. And the fact that the Klimastiftung, Klima- und Umweltstiftung MV, to this day remains unsanctioned means that it undermines our future, possibly, in the efficacy of sanctions, because it created a playbook for other authoritarian nations to create fake NGOs, also undermining actual climate action, because of course it wasn't built to actually have climate action as a part of its mandate. They say they do. They say they have a separate entity that is focused on climate. And indeed, there may be a small amount of that work going on to kind of add window dressing to the main point of this. But I can assure you the Russian Federation did not fund this to altruistically address climate change, right? To fight against climate change. They did it to malignly create a vehicle to get around Western sanctions against their own Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline. And so that's why I also called on Congress, even though this entity and that ship are no longer directly involved with Nord Stream 2, it still should be sanctioned, and it should be sanctioned rapidly. and the vessel should be designated, because it would otherwise create a precedent for other authoritarian nations to exploit this kind of loophole in sanctions policy going forward. And I really think that has to happen soon.
Absolutely, and this is design made in Germany, but not in the form which we would love to be to have German design being famous. Absolutely disgusting way to evade sanctions and to open the gate to the Russian influence.
And I just want to again say to folks, Sergey, you mentioned this, and I'll say the same thing. We're no way in this discussion, I hope I can say this for you as well, Sergey, we're not trying to create an equivalency between the short-term human suffering that is going on in Ukraine every single day, all of the sort of horrific war crimes and torture and rape and attacks and bombings and terror bombings and things like this. We're not trying to make an equivalency between that short-term, immediate-term action and the long-term impacts of Russia's activities against climate action and against climate impacts. They're both things we need to address, but I think we need to absolutely save Ukraine well before we take any other actions that would undermine our ability to get to Ukrainian victory. And so that's why these sort of disingenuous and cynical climate foundation sort of constructs that aren't actually aimed at climate action, but aimed at undermining our own democratic resilience, those need to be addressed. And we have to look at these two challenges at the same time, and we can address the climate crisis, and we don't have to accept human rights abuses. We can address the climate crisis and support Ukrainian victory, right? We don't need to be buying and in supporting climate addressing infrastructure in Xinjiang from the People's Republic of China, where they have forced labor of the Uyghur population. We don't need to address the climate crisis in a way that also is built on the backs of actual slave labor. And that's why I think that we're going to see more discussion between myself and my other academic colleagues that work more on climate than I do at Penn, in looking for constructs in which we can push these different parts of the Venn diagram together so that we can have a just energy transition, a just climate transition, and not have a green light of human rights abuses and can address national security threats and contingencies. Because we don't do all these things at once. If you take a stovepipe approach, you're also not going to get to an energy transition or a climate goal that you want.
That is, I think it's very important what you have just said, that we need to address things like on many levels. We have a terrible war, genocidal war, with people being exterminated in Ukraine, and we need to stop it. At the same time, we have another level. We have Russia, which sabotages our world completely, and the Russians have claimed it many times they don't care about this climate change because they think that climate change will effectively help them, because many parts of Europe will be unlivable, because the migration movements will start. And where will people migrate? Not to Russia, but to Europe. So we will have problems with like our anti-migrant attitudes. We will not, on some level, we will not be able to protect our borders. We will have like too much people, so we will not be able to integrate them, etc., etc. That is all Russia's hoped, and they just want to do. So all these things, they have quite different impact nowadays, but they all have negative impact sooner or later. Yep. And they all have one root, and it's root criminal Russian regime. And it's root like...
I'll say, Sergey, if they think that climate change will only impact Europe and not the Russian Federation in any meaningful way, that is going to be a rude awakening. Perhaps they are trying to weaponize migration routes and things like this that are driven by the climate crisis in that way. But there are many scientific studies that have warned of the dangers that the warming climate will have on thawing permafrost in Siberia, in the Russian Arctic, that could be housing pathogens and viruses from tens of thousands of years ago that could be unleashed on the global population. And I think that those are the sort of things we have to be worried about as well. And that would have a direct impact on
Absolutely.
Russia, no doubt.
Of course, Benjamin. But we know that it's, after all, it's not that important that the Russians are wrong. It's important that they are doing that because they hope they will get like some profit of that, and that's why like they are impacting this whole thing, because they believe that they will be profiteers out of this development, and that's why they act. That's why they need to be stopped. But I think we are now going already, like we are broadcasting more than 1 hour and 44 minutes. And frankly speaking, I think that you, Benjamin, are absolutely tired by now. Thank you for your time. And I think we will slowly stop it. We will definitely come back once again to this topic. It's very important, and I hope that the connection will be much better next time. So before we round up, don't forget also, if you are interested in such interviews, not only in live broadcasting but in records, go to YouTube, European Resilience Initiative Center or Euro Resilience, and you will have our channel. Please subscribe to it, and you will have an access to all possible interviews we have with experts on military security, economic security, social security, resilience. YouTube channel, Euro Resilience. Just go and sign and stay with Ukraine. That is important. So, Benjamin, my last question: is there any hope in sight? Will European governments pay attention to this problem, which they need to pay?
Well, they're either going to pay attention to the problem, or the problem is going to pay attention to them. And I think that we need to know that that is what's going to happen. And more responses up through NATO Article 4, more public-private partnerships between energy and critical infrastructure operators and providers and governments, militaries, law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies needs to go on. A much greater recognition of the role that commercial space infrastructure is playing in this new era that we are in, and how it can help with monitoring and possible attribution of sabotage incidents, both on the high seas and on shore. That's got to be part of it. And remember, attribution can lead to deterrence. So that's part of the reason why we need more and more of these countries to take steps to name and shame publicly, early and often, and have a strategic communication strategy that is a part and parcel to that sort of goal, rather than saying, we don't really know who did this, even though there's a 99.99999% chance that Russia did it. Say that, right? Explain what evidence you can publicly, and explain enough of that so that the public continues to have a trust in our ability to push back on Russian sabotage operations. So I'll leave it there, Sergey. Thanks everyone for watching, and really appreciate being here. And Slava Ukraini.
Heroem Slava, and thank you again, Ben, for this amazing, insightful conversation. Once again, don't forget to like, to share, and to subscribe to Euro Resilience YouTube channel. If you're watching us on Twitter, on X, please go to YouTube and sign to Euro Resilience, because you will get access to all recorded interviews, not only to live interviews. And today we had a conversation with Dr. Benjamin Schmitt, who is an expert on energy infrastructure security, who is a fellow at CEPA, Center for European Policy Analysis, who is an expert at the University of Pennsylvania, and who worked for the United States Department of State, focusing on energy security and security of networks. Thank you, Benjamin, for your time. Stay with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Heroem Slava. And Sergey, for the folks at home, is this recorded? Is this something that folks can watch back later if they'd like?
Yes, absolutely. There will be recording on YouTube. This is recorded. You can watch it on YouTube later, and on X, on Twitter. Unfortunately, there are two parts of the conversation, because the first one had to be stopped because of the wrong title. And you have the whole second part recorded under the correct name, and the first part on the wrong name, but both are available in my Twitter account, Sumlenny. So you will definitely have the recorded version. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
We need to stay a bit online before it ends the broadcasting.